The front door opened before I could say one word. I was standing in the grand study of Thornfield Estate, my hands still trembling from the cold rain outside, while my brother's entire legal team stared at me like I was a common trespasser. My brother, Caleb, had just slapped a notarized copy of Our Father's Will onto the mahogany desk and said, "It's over, Julianne. Dad left the $2 million and the entire estate to me. You're not mentioned." Then my mother, Lydia, pointed at the door with a cold, manicured finger and screamed, "Get out of my house. You were never a real Thorne anyway." That was the moment the front door opened, and the man who stepped inside made every person in that room go silent. But let me back up a little. That morning, I had been at the State Archive, finishing a report on the restoration of 19th-century coastal manners. I was tired in that deep, intellectual way, the kind of exhaustion that comes from breathing in dust and history for 10 hours straight. But I was expectant. Today was the official reading of my father's final will and testament. Arthur Thorne had passed away 3 weeks ago, and since then, the silence from my mother and brother had been deafening. My father was a man of stone and iron. He built Thorne Development from a single truck and a pile of gravel into a multi-million-dollar empire. As an architectural historian, I was the only one who shared his passion for the soul of buildings. Caleb? Caleb only cared about the profit margins and the status. For the last 5 years, while I sat by my father's bedside during his bouts with pneumonia, Caleb was in Monaco or Aspen, networking on the company's dime. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lydia, my mother. "The reading is at 2 p.m. at the house. Don't be late. There's a surprise waiting for you." I stared at the message and felt a flicker of hope. A surprise. After years of Lydia treating me like an outsider because I chose history over high society galas, I thought maybe, just maybe, my father had left a final message of reconciliation. I texted back, "I'll be there." I drove to the estate with the windows cracked, the smell of damp earth and pine filling the car. I remember thinking, maybe this is where we heal. Maybe Dad fixed the rift before he left us. The Thorne estate looked imposing as I pulled into the driveway. It was a massive Gothic revival structure that Dad had restored himself. Lights were on in every room, and several black SUVs lined the curb. But when I stepped into the study, the warmth I expected wasn't there. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and cold ambition. Caleb sat in Dad's oversized leather chair, looking every bit the heir apparent. Lydia stood beside him, her face a mask of porcelain indifference. 2 lawyers I didn't recognize were standing by the window. "You're late," Caleb said, checking his gold watch. "The traffic was heavy," I replied, sitting in the chair opposite him. "Where is Silas?" "He's handled Dad's affairs for 40 years. Silas Vane has been retired from this specific matter," Lydia said, her voice like shards of ice. "We found a more efficient firm to handle the transition." That's when Caleb threw the papers. "Here's the short version, Julianne. The $2 million liquid inheritance, the development firm, and this estate go to me. Mom gets the trust fund and the Florida property. You get to pack your things." For a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. That's impossible. Dad told me he had secured my future. He promised the historical foundation would be funded. Caleb leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Dad was old and confused at the end. He realized that giving money to a historian was like throwing it into a fire. He wanted the Thorne legacy to grow, not stay buried in the dirt with your old ruins. Lydia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You've spent your whole life acting like you're better than us because you have academic integrity. Well, integrity doesn't pay the taxes on this house. Caleb does. Get out, Julianne. Take your books and your disappointment and leave." Before I could find my voice to fight back, the massive oak front door swung open. A deep, gravelly voice echoed through the hallway. "I believe there's been a significant oversight in this room." Everyone turned. Silas Vane stepped into the study. At 70 years old, Silas still carried himself like a wolf in a tailored suit. He was clutching a weathered leather briefcase, his eyes scanning the room with a look of profound disappointment. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Silas didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight to the desk, ignoring Caleb's new lawyers. "Caleb." "Lydia," he nodded curtly. Then he looked at me, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second. "Julianne." Caleb stood up, his face reddening. "Silas, I told you your services were no longer required. We have the notarized will right here. It's signed, witnessed, and final." "Is it?" Silas asked, his voice calm and dangerously low. He placed his briefcase on the desk and popped the brass latches. "Because the document you're holding is a draft from 5 years ago. A draft that Arthur specifically asked me to hold in case of exactly what is happening right now." Lydia scoffed, crossing her arms. "Arthur was in no state to change his will in the final months. We have medical records." "He didn't change it in his final months, Lydia," Silas said, pulling a thick, cream-colored envelope from his bag. "He changed it the day Caleb tried to sell the East Ridge Heritage site behind his back. That was 3 years ago." The room went silent again. Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's a lie. Dad would never cut me out." "He didn't cut you out entirely," Silas replied, putting on his reading glasses. "But he added a very specific, very ironclad addendum. A single line that changes the entire distribution of the Thorne fortune." Caleb reached for the envelope, but Silas pulled it back. "Not yet. First, I want to hear it from your own mouths. You've already told Julianne she has nothing? You've already ordered her to leave the property?" "She doesn't belong here," Lydia snapped. "She's a Thorne by blood, but she's an outsider by choice." Silas sighed, a sound of genuine pity. "Then you've made this very easy for me." He opened the envelope and pulled out a document embossed with the official seal of the state's highest probate court. "This is the final, executed will and testament of Arthur Thorne. And there is a clause on page 12, paragraph 4, that I believe you all forgot to look for, mostly because Arthur and I made sure it was hidden in plain sight." I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the paper, then at Silas. "What does it say, Silas?" The old lawyer looked at Caleb, then at Lydia, and finally at me. "It says that the distribution of the $2 million and the control of the estate is conditional." "Conditional on what?" Caleb demanded. "On the preservation of the Thorne legacy," Silas read aloud. "Specifically, the document states, in the event that any heir attempts to liquidate or sell any historical Thorne property without the unanimous consent of the appointed conservator, their portion of the inheritance is immediately forfeited and redirected to said conservator." Caleb laughed, a harsh, nervous sound. "Fine. I'm the heir. I'm the head of the company. I'm the conservator." Silas looked him dead in the eye and flipped the page. "No, Caleb. Paragraph 4, line 6, I hereby appoint my daughter, Julianne Thorne, as the sole and permanent conservator of all Thorne estate assets, citing her unparalleled dedication to the history and integrity of our family's work." Lydia's face went pale. Caleb's hand started to shake. That can't be legal. She's a historian. She doesn't know anything about the business. She knows enough to know that you've already signed a preliminary sale agreement for the Thornfield estate to a luxury condo developer," Silas said, pulling a second set of papers from his bag. "I have the tracking on your emails, Caleb. You signed it yesterday, didn't you? Less than a month after your father was buried." The silence that followed was suffocating. Caleb looked at the floor, his bravado crumbling. Lydia looked like she was about to faint. "By signing that agreement," Silas continued, his voice rising in authority, "you triggered the line of forfeiture. You didn't just lose the house, Caleb. You lost the $2 million. You lost the firm. And you lost your right to stay on this property." I looked at my brother, the man who had just tried to throw me into the street. I looked at my mother, who had stood by and watched. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the disappointing daughter. I felt the weight of my father's trust. Julianne, Silas said, turning to me and handing me the gold-nibbed pen my father had used for decades. As the conservator, you have the final word. Do you want to enforce the forfeiture clause? I looked at Caleb's pale face, then at the $2 million check sitting inside the ledger. My mind raced through the years of being ignored, the years of caring for Dad alone, and the sheer cruelty of the last hour. I took the pen, but I didn't sign yet. I looked at my mother. You said I wasn't a real thorn, I whispered. Lydia didn't answer. She couldn't even look at me. You said Dad was confused, I said to Caleb. But it looks like he was the only one who saw exactly what was going to happen. I looked down at the document. There was one more thing Silas hadn't mentioned, a small note handwritten in the margin by my father's own hand. My eyes blurred as I read it, asterisk to my jewels, who knows that some things are too precious to be sold. Protect the heart of this family, because the others have lost theirs. Asterisk. I gripped the pen tighter. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was protecting a legacy that they had tried to turn into a paycheck. But as I leaned forward to sign the document that would officially strip my brother of everything, I noticed something else, something in the way Caleb was looking at the lawyers by the window. It wasn't just fear. It was a warning. Wait, I said, pausing with the pen hovering over the paper. Silas, if Caleb signed a sale agreement yesterday, who exactly did he sign it with? Caleb's eyes snapped to mine, and for a second, the mask of a loser vanished, replaced by a desperate, dangerous glint. It doesn't matter who, Caleb hissed. Because they've already wired the first installment. And they don't take kindly to conservators getting in their way. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a trap. And as I looked at the document Silas was holding, I realized the game hadn't even truly begun. Who exactly did you sign with, Caleb? I repeated, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his expensive silk tie suddenly looking like a noose. He looked at Lydia, but for the first time, our mother wasn't looking back with pity. She was looking at him with a dawning, horrific realization. Vanguard Apex, Caleb finally spat out. They're a private equity group out of Chicago. They don't care about line of forfeiture clauses or sentimental architectural history, Julianne. They care about the 4.2 acres of prime real estate this house sits on. They've already liquidated 3 other estates in this zip code this year. The contract I signed has a non-interference penalty of $500,000. If you try to block this with some legal loophole Dad scribbled in a margin, they won't just sue the estate. They'll sue you. Personally. Silas Vane didn't blink. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet, tapping the screen a few times before sliding it across the mahogany table toward me. Vanguard Apex is a shell company, Julianne. I've been tracking them since your father first fell ill. I knew Caleb was talking to them. What your brother hasn't told you, or perhaps what he's too arrogant to realize, is that Vanguard Apex is currently under federal investigation for predatory land acquisition. Silas looked at Caleb with a cold, professional disdain. Caleb didn't just sell the house. He took a consulting fee under the table to bypass the probate period. That's not just a breach of the will, Caleb. That's wire fraud. The color drained from Caleb's face. He lunged for the tablet, but Silas was faster, pulling it back. Don't, Silas warned. There are 3 sheriff's deputies parked at the end of the driveway, Caleb. I suggested they wait until we finished our family discussion, but I can call them up to the porch right now. I looked at the gold pen in my hand. My father, Arthur Thorne, had been a man of blueprints and structural integrity. He spent his life ensuring that buildings could withstand the weight of time and the elements. As an architectural historian, I understood his obsession. A house isn't just wood and stone, it's a narrative. It's a record of who lived there, what they valued, and what they were willing to protect. You were going to let them tear it down, I whispered, looking at the ornate crown molding I used to trace with my fingers as a child. You were going to let them bulldoze the library where Dad taught us how to read maps. You were going to destroy the solarium he built specifically because Mom loved the morning light. I was going to save us, Julianne. Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. The firm is bleeding money. Dad was a genius with a compass, but he was a fossil when it came to modern margins. We're $1.8 million in debt. That inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a life raft. If I didn't sell Thornfield, we'd lose everything anyway. We? I asked. Or you? Silas, is the firm in debt? Silas sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. The firm is struggling, yes. But it isn't $1.8 million in debt because of your father's fossilized methods. It's in debt because your brother tried to expand into high-risk commercial development in Dubai without a hedge. He used the Thorn name to secure loans he couldn't back, and then he used the estate's capital to pay off the interest. Lydia finally spoke, her voice a fragile ghost of its former self. Caleb. You told me the money was for Arthur's medical bills. You said the insurance didn't cover the specialized care. Caleb turned away, unable to look at her. The betrayal was so thick in the room I could almost taste it. My mother had chosen him. She had sidelined me, treated me like a stranger in my own home, all because she believed Caleb was the one holding the family together. She had sacrificed her relationship with her daughter to protect the son she thought was her protector. He lied to you, Mom, I said, not with malice, but with a profound sadness. He didn't just try to take my share. He was stealing yours, too. I turned back to the document. The line of forfeiture. It was a simple sentence, tucked away at the very end of the third page, asterisk, should any beneficiary attempt to encumber, sell, or negotiate the transfer of the Thorn ancestral lands prior to the full settlement of probate, such beneficiary shall immediately and irrevocably forfeit all claims to the residue of the estate, including liquid assets, business holdings, and personal property, with all such interests passing immediately to the designated conservator. Asterisk. And the designated conservator is me, I said. Julianne, wait, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. If you sign that, the developers will come after me for the deposit. They'll take my car, my apartment, my reputation. I'll be ruined. Is that what you want? To see your own brother on the street? You were perfectly happy to see me on the street an hour ago, I reminded him. You had my bags packed in your head before Dad's body was even cold. I lowered the pen to the paper. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was the moment. With one stroke, I would become the sole owner of the $2 million inheritance, the Thorn architectural firm, and the Thornfield estate. I would also become the woman who destroyed her brother's life. But then, I thought about the library. I thought about the blueprints. I thought about the one line my father left for me. He knew this would happen. He had designed this will like he designed his buildings, with a fail-safe. He knew Caleb's greed was a structural flaw, and he knew I was the only one who cared enough about the foundation to fix it. I signed my name. Julianne Thorn. The ink was black and bold. As soon as the loop of the E was finished, Silas reached out and picked up the paper, blotting it carefully. It's done, Silas said. Caleb, as of this moment, you are no longer a partner at Thorn Associates. You have no access to the estate accounts. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Your personal belongings will be audited to ensure no estate assets are removed. Caleb didn't move. He looked like he was in shock. Then, slowly, the shock turned into a dark, simmering rage. He stood up, knocking his chair back so hard it cracked against the floor. You think you've won, Jules? You think you're the hero of this story? You're a historian. You live in the past. But the real world is coming for this house, and I'm the only one who knew how to talk to them. When Vanguard Apex finds out the contract is void, they're going to tear this place apart with lawyers. You won't have $2 million left by the time they're done with you. You'll have a mountain of legal fees and a rotting house you can't afford to heat. He looked at Lydia. And you? you're going to stay here with her? The daughter you ignored for 10 years? Good luck. You'll be lucky if she doesn't put you in the cheapest home she can find. That's enough, Caleb, Silas said, stepping between them. Caleb grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door. Enjoy the ruins, Julianne. They suit you. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the high ceilings of the foyer. Then, there was silence. The kind of silence that follows a massive explosion. Lydia sat at the table, her hands trembling. She looked at the $2 million check still sitting in the ledger. She looked at me, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't see the woman who judged me. I saw a woman who was terrified. Julianne, she began, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I thought he was doing what was best for all of us. I know you did, Mom, I said, sitting down across from her. I didn't move to hug her. The bridge was still too broken for that. But you didn't even ask me. You didn't even give me a chance to show you what I was doing for Dad. He told me you were too busy with your books. He said you found the house stifling and that you only came around to ask for money. I felt a sharp sting in my chest. I never asked him for a dime. I was the one paying for his private nurses on my assistant professor's salary while Caleb was buying a new Porsche. Lydia buried her face in her hands. The reality of her son's deception was finally setting in. But we didn't have time for a family reconciliation. Silas cleared his throat, drawing my attention back to the matter at hand. Julianne, we have a problem. Caleb wasn't entirely lying about Vanguard Apex. They are aggressive. And they have a signature on a sale agreement. While the line of forfeiture makes that signature legally void from the estate's perspective, they will argue they acted in good faith. We need to move fast. What do we do? I asked. We need to designate Thornfield as a historical landmark, I said, my professional instincts finally kicking in. If I can get the state board to fast-track the architectural significance filing, no developer can touch the exterior or the grounds. It becomes a protected site. That kills the value for a condo developer instantly. Silas nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Your father hoped you'd say that. He actually prepared the preliminary structural reports himself. They're in the safe in his study. But there's something else, Silas continued, his expression darkening. The check for $2 million. It's not just cash, Julianne. It's tied to a specific trust. A trust that only matures if the firm stays within the family. If Vanguard Apex sues and wins even a partial judgment, they could go after the trust assets. We need to prove that Caleb's consulting fee was a bribe. He mentioned a wire transfer, I remembered. He said they already wired the first installment. If we can find that record, Silas said, we can prove he was acting in bad faith. But Caleb isn't going to give us his bank passwords. I looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. Somewhere out there, Caleb was probably already on the phone with the developers, trying to save himself by throwing me under the bus. He doesn't have to, I said. He's been using the firm's server for all his personal business. He thinks he's the only one who knows the admin codes. But Dad gave them to me years ago, back when I used to help him archive the old project files. I stood up, feeling a surge of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just the disappointing daughter anymore. I was the protector of the Thorne legacy. Silas, stay with my mother. I'm going to the study. If those deputies are still at the end of the drive, tell them I might need them to stay for a while. If Caleb tries to come back, he won't get past the gate, Silas promised. I walked toward the study, the heart of the house. As I passed through the hallway, I felt the eyes of my ancestors watching from their portraits. For years, I felt like I didn't belong here. I felt like a ghost in a house that only valued men with blueprints. But as I opened the heavy doors to my father's study, the smell of old paper and cedar tobacco filled my lungs, and I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. I sat at my father's desk, the leather chair creaking under my weight. I powered up the computer, my fingers hovering over the keys. My heart pounded as I entered the admin code, my birthday. The screen flickered to life. I bypassed the firm's active project folders and went straight to the encrypted drive. There, tucked away in a folder labeled personal/tax prep, I found it. It wasn't just one wire transfer. It was a series of them, stretching back 6 months. Caleb hadn't just sold the house, he had been selling the firm's trade secrets to Vanguard Apex's competitors for nearly a year. He was dismantling our father's life piece by piece, long before Arthur had even passed away. But then, I saw a file that made my blood run cold. It was an email draft, addressed to an attorney I didn't recognize. The subject line was, contesting the conservatorship mental incapacity of Arthur Thorne. Caleb had been planning to have Dad declared mentally unfit so he could take over the estate early. And the witness he was going to use to prove Dad was confused? It was my mother. I stared at the screen, a sick feeling rising in my stomach. Caleb had drafted a statement for Lydia to sign, a statement that said Arthur had lost his mind months before the will was updated. If he had succeeded, the new will, and the line of forfeiture, would be tossed out of court. I scrolled down to see if it had been sent. My breath caught in my throat. The draft was empty. But there was a reply in the sent folder from 3 days ago. The witness is no longer cooperating. Plan B is in motion. We sell now, before the sister gets home. Plan B, I whispered. Suddenly, the lights in the study flickered and died. The hum of the computer silenced as the screen went black. The house, usually so warm and full of history, was plunged into a sudden, suffocating darkness. From the hallway, I heard a sound. A heavy, rhythmic thud. It wasn't the sound of someone walking. It was the sound of something being dragged. Silas? I called out, my voice sounding small in the dark. Mom? No answer. I reached for my phone, but the screen was dead. I had just charged it. I tried the desk lamp, nothing. The entire circuit had been cut. I stood up, my hand searching the desk for the heavy brass paperweight Dad used. I gripped it tight, my knuckles white. I stepped toward the door, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it could be heard through the walls. Julianne? It was my mother's voice, but it wasn't coming from the parlor where I'd left her. It was coming from the basement stairs. She sounded terrified. Mom, stay where you are. I shouted, moving into the hallway. The moonlight through the high windows cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor. I reached the parlor, but Silas and Lydia were gone. The $2 million check was still on the table, but the ledger had been ripped open. Then, I saw it. The front door was wide open, the cold night air blowing the curtains like ghosts. A figure stood in the doorway. Not Caleb. Someone much larger, wearing a dark tactical jacket. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a developer. Miss Thorne, the man said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. You have something that belongs to my employers. And we'd really prefer not to involve the authorities in a family matter. Who are you? I demanded, backing away toward the kitchen. I'm the person who ensures Plan B goes smoothly, he said, stepping into the light. Your brother is a very poor gambler, Julianne. He didn't just owe Vanguard Apex a house. He owes them the $2 million. And since he doesn't have it anymore, I suppose you're the one we need to talk to. I realized then that the $2 million inheritance wasn't just a fortune. It was a target. And Caleb hadn't just lost his inheritance, he had traded my life for his own debt. I looked at the gold-nibbed pen still in my pocket. I looked at the dark hallway leading to the back servants' entrance. I had a choice to make. I could run, or I could use the one thing my father gave me that Caleb never understood, the secret architecture of this house. The inheritance is gone, I said, my voice cold. And if you want to find my mother and Silas, you're going to have to find me first. I didn't wait for a response, I bolted into the darkness of the house I knew better than anyone alive. but as I ran, I realized Caleb had one more secret. The one line in the will wasn't the only thing he'd forgotten. He'd forgotten that in a house built on secrets, the person who knows the walls always wins. But I didn't know yet that the plan B involved someone else. Someone I never would have suspected. Someone who was currently standing in the basement, holding a lighter next to the original blueprints of the Thorne legacy. I slipped into the narrow service corridor, a space hidden behind the mahogany paneling of the main hallway that only my father and I ever truly appreciated. As an architectural historian, I understood the anatomy of Thorne Manor better than its own builders. To Caleb, these were just walls; to me, they were a map of my father's mind. The heavy thud of the man's boots echoed against the floorboards on the other side of the lath and plaster. I held my breath, the scent of aged cedar and dust filling my lungs. My father, Arthur Thorne, hadn't just been a businessman, he was a man obsessed with legacy and protection. He knew Caleb's weaknesses long before Caleb did. "Julianne. I know you're in the walls." Caleb's voice shrieked from the parlor, brittle and desperate. "Just give them the ledger. Silas has the keys to the offshore accounts listed in Dad's notes. If we give them what they want, we can keep the house." I gritted my teeth. Caleb was still deluding himself. The Vanguard Apex agents didn't want a ledger, they wanted the land. The Thorne estate sat on the last unzoned ridge overlooking the valley, a multi-million-dollar development opportunity that Dad had fought to protect for 40 years. I moved silently through the dark passage, my fingers tracing the cold stone of the foundation. I reached the service lift, the old manual dumbwaiter, and pulled myself down the ropes with practiced ease, descending toward the basement. The basement of Thorne Manor wasn't a cellar, it was a vault. My father had spent his final years down here, surrounded by the blueprints of every building he'd ever designed. As I stepped out into the damp air of the sublevel, the flickering light of a single lighter caught my eye. Silas Vane was standing by the central furnace, a stack of original blueprints in his weathered hands. He looked up, the flame reflecting in his tired eyes. "I wondered if you'd find your way down here, Julianne," Silas said softly. He didn't look like a lawyer at that moment, he looked like a man carrying the weight of a century. "Silas, where's Mom?" I whispered, stepping into the dim light. "Lydia is safe." "I moved her through the tunnel to the gardener's cottage before the power was cut," Silas replied, his voice steady despite the chaos upstairs. "But we have a problem. Your brother didn't just borrow money, Julianne. He signed over a quitclaim deed that he hadn't even read. He thought he was signing for a loan, but he was signing away the title of this house to Vanguard Apex." "He couldn't have," I argued, my heart sinking. "The house was in the trust. Dad made sure of that." "He did," Silas said, stepping closer. He held up a single sheet of paper, the one line from the will that the developers, and Caleb, had overlooked. But the trust had a contingency. Arthur knew Caleb would try to liquidate the estate. He knew Caleb would see the $2 million as a prize rather than a responsibility. I looked at the blueprints spread out on the table. My father's gold-nibbed pen sat beside them. "The one line," I muttered. "What is it, Silas? Why are they so desperate to get the ledger?" Silas pointed to the blueprints of the house's foundation. "Your father didn't just build a house, Julianne. He built a fortress. The ledger isn't a book of bank accounts. It's a structural log. There is a specific architectural anomaly in this house, a historical designation filed in a private annex 40 years ago. According to the will, the legacy of Thorne is not in the gold, but in the stone that cannot be moved." Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the top of the basement stairs groaned. Caleb was there, flanked by the man in the tactical jacket. "Give it to them, Silas," Caleb yelled, his face pale and sweating. "They've got sensors. They know the ledger is down there. Julianne, stop being a martyr. We can take the money and leave this drafty old tomb behind." The man in the jacket stepped forward, his hand resting on a holster at his hip. "Miss Thorne, I'm not here for a history lesson. I'm here for the document that proves this property is a protected historical landmark. If that document disappears, this house is just a pile of bricks standing in the way of a highway. My employers will pay you to walk away, or they will make sure you're buried under the demolition." I looked at Silas. He was holding the lighter near the edges of the original blueprints. My mind raced through the dates, the measurements, and the specific wording of my father's final testament. "You're wrong," I said, my voice gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. "You think the document is the only thing protecting this house. You think if you burn the blueprints and the ledger, you can just bulldoze the history. It worked for every other property on this ridge," the man said with a cold smirk. "But this isn't every other property," I countered. I turned to the wall behind Silas, a section of the foundation made of heavy, uncut quartz and granite. "Caleb, do you remember what Dad used to say about the line in his will? The one he made us recite every Christmas?" Caleb blinked, confused. "I don't know, something about the line that connects us?" "No," I said, stepping toward the wall. "He said, the inheritance is only for the one who recognizes the line that cannot be crossed." "You thought it was a metaphor. You thought it was about family loyalty." I reached into the small, decorative crevice in the masonry, a detail I had studied for my thesis on Victorian defensive architecture. Inside was a small iron lever, disguised as a rusted support bracket. "It wasn't a metaphor, Caleb," I said, looking him in the eye. "It was a structural command." I pulled the lever. A deep, mechanical grind vibrated through the floor. Above us, in the main hall, the sound of heavy iron shutters slamming shut echoed like cannon fire. The house wasn't just locking down, it was sealing. "What did you do?" the man in the jacket demanded, drawing his weapon. "I activated the preservation protocol," I said calmly. "This house is now a sealed historical vault. According to the one line in the will, once the security perimeter is breached by unauthorized parties, the title of the land is automatically transferred to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, with me as the permanent, irrevocable conservator. The $2 million inheritance? It's not cash, Caleb. It's an endowment fund for the house's upkeep. You can't spend a dime of it on your debts." Caleb's jaw dropped. You trapped us in here? With him?" He pointed at the man with the gun. "No," Silas interjected, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "She didn't trap us. She alerted the authorities." The silent alarm went directly to the federal marshal's office the moment those shutters dropped. "You see, the Thorne Manor is registered as a site of national security significance due to the architectural archives stored here. Breaking in isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's a federal offense." The man in the jacket looked toward the stairs, then back at me. He realized the plan B his employers had devised hadn't accounted for a woman who treated blueprints like holy scripture. But as the sound of sirens began to wail in the far distance, echoing through the valley, Caleb did something I didn't expect. He didn't run. He didn't beg. He lunged for the blueprints in Silas's hand. "If I can't have the money, nobody gets the house," Caleb screamed. He knocked Silas aside, the lighter falling into a pile of dry parchment. A tongue of orange flame licked upward, catching the edge of the 1924 master plan, the only document that proved the house's unique structural status. "Caleb, no." I lunged forward, but the man in the tactical jacket grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Let it burn," the man hissed. "If the proof is gone, my employers still win. A house with no history is just land." I struggled, watching the fire grow, consuming the very legacy my father had died to protect. But then, I remembered the gold-nibbed pen in my pocket. I remembered the weight of it. It wasn't just a writing tool. My father had used it to sign every contract, every design, every dream. I looked at the fire, then at the man holding me, and then at the shadow of my father's desk. I realized then that the one line wasn't just about the wool. It was about the one line I had to draw in the sand to save my family from themselves. The smoke began to fill the basement, thick and acrid. Caleb was coughing, staring at the growing blaze with a look of horror, finally realizing that he had destroyed his only safety net. "The blueprints," Silas shouted, trying to beat the flames with his jacket. Julianne, the original survey is in there. I broke free from the man's grip, not by strength, but by a sharp, calculated move I'd learned in a self-defense class for solo architectural surveyors. I didn't run for the fire. I ran for the central pillar of the basement, the massive oak beam that supported the entire north wing. Hidden behind a small brass plaque that read Arthur Thorne, 1958, was a small, waterproof compartment. You think Dad would leave the only copy of the truth in a flammable pile of paper? I yelled over the roar of the fire. I flipped the plaque. Inside was a flash drive and a vacuum-sealed ledger, the real ledger. The man in the jacket moved toward me, but he was too late. The iron shutters in the basement had finished their cycle, locking us all in a tomb of stone and smoke. You're going to give me that ledger, Miss Thorne, the man said, his voice dropping to a murderous whisper as he raised his gun. Or you're going to die in the fire your brother started. I stood my ground, the real history of Thorne Manor gripped in my hand. I looked at Caleb, who was sobbing on the floor, and Silas, who was leaning against the wall, gasping for air. The one line in the will, Caleb, I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. The one you forgot? It said, to my daughter Julianne, I leave the keys to the kingdom, for she is the only one who knows that the strongest structures are built on the truth. I looked at the intruder. You can kill me. But the moment my heart rate changes, this vault automatically uploads the digitized records to the federal server. You've already lost. The man hesitated, the red dot of his laser sight trembling on my chest. For the first time, he looked afraid. He wasn't fighting a historian anymore. He was fighting a house that was alive with its creator spirit. But as the smoke grew thicker and the heat became unbearable, a sound came from the floorboards above us. A sound that shouldn't have been possible. It was the sound of a piano. The old Steinway in the parlor was playing. A slow, haunting melody that my father used to play every evening at dusk. Lydia. My mother wasn't at the gardener's cottage. She was still in the house. And she was doing the one thing that could override the security system. She's playing the sequence, Silas whispered, his eyes wide. The sequence? I asked, confused. The musical override, Silas said, a look of awe on his face. Arthur didn't just use levers and gears. He used acoustics. The frequency of those notes. It's the only way to open the shutters from the inside. The intruder turned his head toward the ceiling, distracted by the ethereal music. This was my chance. I grabbed the heavy brass paperweight from the desk and swung with every ounce of frustration and betrayal I had felt since Dad's funeral. The blow caught the man on the temple, and he crumpled to the floor. Caleb! Get the extinguisher! I shouted. My brother, shaken out of his stupor, grabbed the red canister from the wall and began spraying the fire. I didn't wait to see if he succeeded. I ran for the dumbwaiter, pulling myself up to the parlor as fast as my aching arms would allow. I burst through the paneling and into the room. The moon was shining through the high windows, and there, sitting at the piano in the dark, was my mother. Her eyes were closed, her fingers moving across the keys with a grace I hadn't seen in years. Mom! I cried out. She didn't stop. Your father told me, Julianne, she said, her voice sounding younger, clearer. He told me that one day, the boys would try to burn it all down. He said I had to wait for the music. The iron shutters began to rise, the moonlight flooding the room. Outside, the driveway was filled with the flashing blue and red lights of federal vehicles. I collapsed onto the sofa, the real ledger still clutched to my chest. I looked at the $2 million check still sitting on the coffee table, now covered in a fine layer of soot. Caleb came up the stairs a moment later, covered in white fire extinguisher powder, looking broken. He looked at me, then at the ledger, and finally at our mother, who had finally finished the song. I'm sorry, Jules, he whispered. I was so far in debt. I thought I could fix it. You couldn't fix a leak in a bathtub, Caleb, I said, my voice cold. You almost killed us. You almost destroyed everything Dad built. But I saved the house, he said, gesturing to the extinguished basement. No, I replied, standing up and walking toward the federal officers who were now bursting through the front door. I saved the house. You're just the one who's going to explain to the marshals why you invited a corporate assassin to dinner. As the officers moved in to arrest the man in the basement and take Caleb into custody for questioning, Silas Vane walked into the parlor, his face smudged with ash but his eyes bright with victory. The trust is secure, Julianne, Silas said, handing me a handkerchief. And the National Trust has already confirmed the upload. The Thorne estate is now a protected monument. No one can ever touch this land again. I looked around the room, the high ceilings, the intricate crown molding, the history in every shadow. I had my inheritance. It wasn't the $2 million Caleb had craved. It was the duty to protect the stone and the story. But as the night began to fade into dawn, Silas leaned in close to me, his voice a low whisper that made my blood run cold. There's just one thing, Julianne. In the ledger you found, did you look at the last page? I frowned, opening the sealed document. I flipped to the very back, past the blueprints and the historical filings. There, in my father's precise, elegant handwriting, was a final note dated the day he died. Asterisk to Julianne, the house is the shell, but the secret is in the foundation. Beneath the north pillar, there is a second vault. It doesn't contain documents. It contains the reason Vanguard Apex was willing to kill for this ridge. Look for the golden ratio in the floorboards. Don't let Silas see this. Asterisk. I looked up at Silas. He was smiling at me, a kind, paternal smile that suddenly felt like a mask. What did it say, dear? Silas asked, stepping a fraction too close. I slowly closed the ledger, my heart starting to hammer again. The $2 million wasn't the inheritance. The house wasn't even the inheritance. There was something else. Something my father hadn't even trusted his oldest friend with. It just says, I love you, I lied, forced a smile, and tucked the ledger under my arm. I realized then that the war for Thorne Manor wasn't over. It had only just moved beneath the floorboards. And the person standing next to me might be the most dangerous architect of all. I stood there, watching Silas Vane walk toward his car through the morning mist, his posture upright and his expression unreadable. He thought he had won. He thought he had secured the shell of Thorne Manor while the real prize remained hidden. But he had forgotten one thing about my father, Arthur Thorne. He was a man of precision, and he knew exactly which child would truly look at the foundation of things. As soon as the tail lights of Silas's car faded, I didn't go to bed. I grabbed my tools and headed straight for the basement, toward the north pillar. My mother, Lydia, was asleep in the parlor, exhausted from her grief and the chaos Caleb had caused. Caleb himself was being held for questioning at the local precinct, a victim of his own greed and the corporate sharks he had invited into our home. I knelt by the north pillar. I counted the floorboards, looking for the sequence of the golden ratio my father had mentioned. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. I pressed the 8th board. It didn't budge. I shifted my weight and pressed the 13th. With a soft, mechanical click, a section of the stone base slid back. Inside wasn't gold or cash. It was a secondary set of architectural deeds and a private contract signed 40 years ago. I scanned the lines, my eyes widening. This was the one line they had all forgotten. The will they had fought over was for the Thorne estate, yes. But this document proved that the land beneath Silas Vane's own law firm and the Vanguard Apex headquarters was actually part of a perpetual historical land grant owned by the Thorne family. Silas hadn't been trying to protect the manor. He had been trying to bury the fact that he owed my father's estate millions in back rent and land usage fees. The $2 million inheritance he had helped Caleb steal was a drop in the bucket compared to what was really at stake. My father hadn't just left me a house, he had left me the leverage to bring down the men who tried to dismantle our legacy. A week later, the dust finally settled. With the evidence from the second vault, Silas Vane was forced into an early, disgraced retirement, his firm's assets frozen as the Thorne Trust reclaimed its dues. Caleb, facing charges for the fire, was given a choice: a long sentence, or a court-mandated rehabilitation program funded by the trust one now controlled. For the first time in his life, my brother had to learn the value of a foundation that wasn't built on debt. My mother, Lydia, stayed in the manor. I used my skills as an architectural historian to restore every inch of the house, turning it into a living museum that honored my father's vision. The $2 million was gone, burned up in Caleb's desperation and Silas's lies. But the Thorne legacy? It was stronger than ever. I realized then that my father hadn't left me a fortune because he knew I didn't need one. He left me the truth, knowing I was the only one who would know where to look for it. Inheritance isn't always about the money in the bank. Sometimes, it's about the one line everyone else was too greedy to read. It's about knowing that while walls can crumble and money can vanish, the integrity of the foundation is what keeps you standing. If this story reminded you that the truth is always worth digging for, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and hidden legacies. Don't forget to leave a comment below. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep looking beneath the surface. The end.